Look, we'll kick it off now. Welcome to the webinar on how Roy Hill achieved integration with SuccessFactors, HROnboard and SAP. We've got a fair few attendees here today. Before we kick off into sort of the guts of the webinar, a couple of housekeeping items. First of all of the attendees are on mute. You can hear us, we can't hear you. If you do want to ask a question, we will have questions at the end. You can click the little QA icon on your panel. It'll either be at the top or the bottom of your screen, and then type in your question. We will answer some questions directly on the spot or through the text, but what we will do is try and hold answers to most of the questions to the end. So today, my name's Michael Specht from HROnboard. I look after our customer success team. With me today, we've got 3 people from Roy Hill. We've got Christo, Nick and Helg. Each one of them will be taking us through part of their story. And they'll be talking us through how they went through integrating HROnboard with the rest of their environments. Welcome, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Michael. Thanks for the introduction.
Okay, that's brilliant. What we'll do is let's kick off. I will give you guys control, so you should now be able to just click us through.
Perfect. My name's Christo. I'm the specialist HRIS Rem and Benefits. So in my space, the systems fall within my space. I look after the systems, HR systems specifically, and we got tasked with eliminating our current paper-based solution that we had in terms of offering candidates employment at Roy Hill. We had a very, very heavily paper-based solution. So we had offers going out in hard copies or emails. If it was on an email, we would have sent emails which was like 8 to 10, 20 megabytes, depending on all the attachments. And candidates had to print the offer, they had to then complete it, they had to then scan it, and then they had to email it back to us. And most of the time when we got the offers back from the candidates or the tax file decks and all that information, it was half completed, or it was wrong, or the quality of the scan was poor, so we couldn't really read it. So we had to then go back and follow up with the candidate again and get all the information back. So that was the process that we had, and the reason being is we're a greenfield project, so we didn't have a mother company where we would get all the information from and follow their processes and sleek systems. So we had to investigate how we could do it. So our recruitment management system is in SuccessFactors, and it's part of our talent management solution. So it's all in the cloud. And we use the recruitment management system as an applicant tracking solution. So we advertise onto Seek, candidates apply, and then all the information is sitting in our recruitment system. And then we had a gap between our recruitment system and our master data system or payroll system, which is SAP, which we had to close. I guess the other current state that we had back then was, because we're greenfield, we rolled out new contracts every year due to the ever-changing nature of the beast that we're running over here. And because our terms and conditions changed on a regular basis, we had to roll out contracts every year. So last year we had, once again, had to go through this paper-based solution and print out about 500 contracts plus all the terms and conditions. So I think overall we had to print out about 60 or 70,000 pages for contract updates. So it was a very, very difficult process to go through. We sat in a room, about 8 to 10 employees, and we had 2 weeks, which we had to work through to get all the contracts out. So very painful. So yeah, that's current state. Nick, I don't know if you want to talk about the recruitment management system and sort of the challenges that you guys faced back then and what we were trying to achieve as well by implementing a system or new solution.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christo. So Nick Sullivan here, everyone. So in regards to success factors, we found it was quite a good system for managing candidates through the recruitment process. And as Christo was saying, we had a very sort of manual offer process. What we wanted to do, obviously, was try and reduce the amount of paperwork which candidates had to complete and send back to us, and reduce the amount of time that people were spending doing that work. So, depending on where the candidates were, and if they were on site, a lot of these people were on site, operators and things, didn't have access to all their information, so they would get their partners back at home to complete the paperwork, and it was just a very labour-intensive process. So we would create the contracts for each of these people manually, email them out to people, and the lead time on getting things back would vary depending on the candidate, but we'd be very lucky to get the paperwork back completed correctly within a couple of days. Sometimes we were following up literally for weeks for candidates to give us all the paperwork we required to set them up on our systems. So, the issue we had was, how do we need to get a good system that can actually help us complete a lot of that work, and how would we integrate that into our current systems? So we spent a lot of time developing or ensuring that we had robust business processes in place, and effectively, one of the things we had to do is really ensure we knew what our process was. We had a lot of touch points in success factors were built around notifications to parts of the business when a candidate had accepted offers. And what we wanted to do was integrate HROnboard without having to change any of our existing workflows and success factors. So by doing a lot of mapping of our processes and really understanding how and when things were happening in the recruitment process, allowed us to sort of integrate that. The standard process really was the candidate, as Christo was saying, applies for a job through Seek or job boards. They would log into or create a candidate profile in success factors, create an application for a specific job, and then move through the recruitment process in a standard sort of fashion through screening, interviews, medicals, reference checks, those sorts of things. We then, if the candidate was successful in that process, we would raise an offer and get it approved through the workflows we have set up in success factors. And those offer templates were then used at that point to generate contracts. So once a offer was approved, we wanted to make sure when we integrated into HROnboard that only candidates who had an approved offer in success factors and were sitting at a certain stage in our recruitment pipeline would be integrated. So that's really the interface that I worked on a lot with Helg, who'll talk about it in a bit more detail. And it seems pretty simple, but there's lots of little complexities with success factors and how we operated there to get that working. So that's, I suppose, what I can add from the success factors point of view.
I think if we look at the next slide, so it's Christo again, if we look at the next slide, which is our solution in terms of our overall architecture that we wanted to put in place, I think the biggest thing to raise is that our SAP system, where we maintain all our positions and employee data, is our source of truth for employees. So we had to then look at the overall picture in terms of where HROnboard would fit in. SuccessFactors has got an onboarding module as well, but because it's very US-based, it was very difficult for us to actually make it work for us as an Australian company only. It works really well for other companies who've got operations outside of Australia, where it fits really well with them. But for us, we wanted to sort of look at what can we do with the HROnboard solution, because we already run All Plus, which is the other module that Navigate provides or supplies to the market. And yeah, so from there we investigated HROnboard and we did a few reference checks, and what we heard back from the market was that it was a really good product. We then built the overall architecture in terms of what it should do for us. So we've got all our master data sitting in SAP. Our positions feeds into SuccessFactors. We then wanted to feed the candidate information into HROnboard to generate the contracts. And then we wanted to integrate all the information that we got back from the candidate into SAP without touching it. That was our ideal, integration model. And So I think we achieved it. It works really well. But before I jump the gun, I'm going to hand over to Helg, who's going to talk in more detail around the actual integration scenarios.
Okay, good morning everyone, it's Helg here. So I'm the integration architect for Roy Hill, and I work in the IT department. And looking at this next slide, so I just want to talk about kind of the effort that we went through. So Christo's already talked about the fact we had two interfaces which we built for the solution. First was obviously some success factors to HROnboard, and then the more challenging one was to get the data out of HROnboard and into our ERP system, which is SAP. So developing that, we had one developer who was working on both interfaces, and we were quite lucky that we had a developer who had skills in SAP as well as in the integration tool which we were using to do the integration, which, if anyone's interested, is SAP Process Integration, another SAP product which is specifically designed for integrating systems. Overall, the development time probably took about 3 months to develop both interfaces, which seems like a long time, but if you've ever done any integration, you understand that integration is never easy. So not all of that time was actually hands-on the tools. It was really just elapsed time working through what are the requirements, how do we get candidate details out of HROnboard, out of success factors and into HROnboard. So go to the next slide. I don't know, Nick, if you wanted to talk more about how... I
suppose just sort of touching on what I mentioned earlier is the fact that we wanted to bring candidates only at a certain point in the recruitment pipeline who had completed or had an approved offer. So success factors, the way we had it set up is we have offer templates and there's a workflow attached to them to get the approvals from line managers and hiring managers, etc. In our just our processes. So we have to make sure that we had approved offers, and we also wanted to make sure that we didn't just send them through to HROnboard if the offer got approved. We wanted them to only get sent to HROnboard when they got moved to the next step in the recruitment pipeline, which we've got set up. So Helg and I worked quite closely to ensure we were selecting the right fields. And I don't know if many people know about success factors, but Helg will probably touch on this a little bit more, but there's a huge range of fields related to candidates and offers that are actually duplicated on different tables, etc., within the system. So we did a lot of testing and trial and error to actually ensure we were picking the right data related to that candidate in the right requisition at the right time, to ensure that our data was valid in the system. So, and that was probably the most challenging part of that particular interface, because we didn't really get a lot of help from success factors. I mean, we didn't necessarily ask for any help, but it's finding people who really understand the success factors data model is not easy. So we were lucky that we had Nick on board, who had already done a lot of reporting out of success factors and understood how the reports work. And so technically, while there are APIs for extracting data out of success factors, none of them are actually suitable for getting candidate details out. So we had to use the reporting framework to build effectively a report and then run a query against that report to extract the fields we want. And we found that depending on which fields we added to that report, we changed the number of rows we got back. So sometimes we got duplicates and sometimes we didn't. So it was a bit of trial and error, trying to pick through all the different fields that are available in success factors. And the other thing to note is that depending on the stage that the candidate is in, they get a chance to update some of their details. So we needed to make sure that we got the candidate details from the right stage in the pipeline, otherwise we would have ended up with incorrect data. Yeah, and that was really the main thing, to get the most accurate data, the correct stuff into HROnboard, because some of that data regarding the position, etc., would relate to the SAP data we were trying to upload later. So we wanted alignment all the way through the systems.
I think we need to have alignment because our source of truth is SAP. So we're actually going around circle from SAP through SuccessFactors recruitment, through HROnboard and back into SAP. So we couldn't really lose the quality data that we have in SAP throughout any of the systems, and we had to map it back to ensure that whatever information got sent from SAP would actually be the same the moment it got back into SAP.
Yeah. So okay, I'll just talk a little bit more about some of the points on this slide. So there was quite strong validation in HROnboard, which is typically what you want when users are manually entering data into via a web page. But because we're integrating with it SuccessFactors, we already captured most of the details, and it was quite difficult to ensure that all the pick lists and all the validation rules were aligned between SuccessFactors and HROnboard, and it was something that we couldn't achieve. So we wanted to be able to send effectively invalid information, stuff that wasn't 100% correct, for the candidate then to fix in HROnboard, but the API was rejecting the information we were sending it. So our solution was to disable all the validation in HROnboard, but I've noticed in the latest release, I think that HROnboard have now reduced the validation that is done when you either import data via CSV file or using their web services, which I think is going to make integration in the future a lot easier.
I suppose just to add to that is, the reason we had issues with some of the data in SuccessFactors is because SuccessFactors lacks some data validation when candidates are creating their profiles. So there's no validation on, at the time, there was no validation on phone numbers candidates were using. So we didn't know if it would be a mobile phone number that they were entering or a landline number. So, and the email addresses, etc. So the data quality in SuccessFactors that candidates had entered themselves was of a variable nature.
So the second point there was just about the concurrent requests. Our integration platform was very enthusiastic in sending requests to HROnboard, and we found that the API couldn't handle sort of multiple requests. So we solved that by just sending through one candidate's detail at a time, and that seems to be working quite successfully at the moment. And the last thing was just if you're an SAP customer, it's quite ironic that they provide you connectivity to SuccessFactors in their integration platform, but unfortunately, because we had to use the reporting capabilities and make dynamic queries, we couldn't actually make use of the package integration that SAP provides, which, it's just another one of those frustrations when you're trying to do integration. There's a solution there, but you can't use it. So we end up having to roll our own. Yeah, fully bespoke. Yeah.
Okay, so if we then look at it from a functional perspective, the integration that was required from HROnboarding to SAP was previously the process was for payroll to walk over to recruitment, pick up the printed documents, go back to their desk, and then manually inputting all the info types, all the data into SAP to capture first name, last name, date of birth, the position ID, the position name, the tax file number, the bank details, and all of that. And it was a very manual process, and it would probably take around 30 to 40 minutes to input a new starter into SAP. Then we've got the second component from an audit perspective, that somebody had to then validate that the data that was input into SAP was actually correct.
Yeah.
So the requirement was that, and this is also what we put into our business case when we put forward the business case for approval, was that we could eliminate the time that somebody had to spend to enter the data into SAP. So our goal was to integrate all the fields that we had in HROnboard that we needed into SAP, that we could completely eliminate the manual handling when entering employee data into SAP. The one thing we could not eliminate was the actual audit perspective, where we had to get somebody to check that the data was valid. But as you would in any master data, you would need that check step in your process to ensure that the data is correct. I'll go over to you just to talk about the actual integration.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Christo. This is a big one, because there's 184 fields which we collect for a person, and that is so that we had to map every single one of those fields through from, most of those came from SuccessFactors at one stage, and then we had to map them through to HROnboard and then eventually into SAP. And then we had to find what SAP calls BAPIs, which is business APIs, for actually programmatically inserting that data into SAP. And they're not very well documented, and there's multiple ones to choose from, so it was a bit of trial and error to get the right ones to work. Ultimate goal was to actually, because you've always got, nothing's going to work 100% every single time, so you need some way to recover from errors. So our goal was to submit effectively one info type. An info type is like an aspect of a person, like their address, their bank account details, their superannuation, their basic bio data. So we wanted to submit each one of those at a time, and if there was an error, then maybe just skip it and move on to the next one. But we couldn't find a way to get that to work. So what we had to do was try and submit all 184 fields at once, And if it failed, we then reverted back to just creating the basic 3 info types, which is your person details and your address, which had a much higher success rate. But in practice, we've managed to get our data quality so good in HROnboard that we've had very few failures entering people into SAP. And that really was just due to the effort we put into to make sure that we had very strong alignment between HROnboard and SAP. And wherever we had data entry fields that the candidate had to enter, the list of values they could choose from was exactly what we had from SAP. Like an example is country codes. So we used all the SAP country codes in HROnboard to make sure that when they picked whatever country they came from, it matched in SAP.
Which took some time, I suppose, to get right in HROnboard, but they were willing to help out and ensure that it was correct for us. So
yep. And that was the time-consuming part for us as well to work through. We had to have the right SAP HR consultant who understood SAP well enough to work out which of these fields we needed, and then to work through any of those issues. But we had a lot of help from payroll too. So I think the key thing for us for this integration was having the right people who had the knowledge of the systems in order to make this work.
Yeah, correct. I think if you are going to just depend on your IT department or just your HR department to implement HROnboard, I'd probably recommend not to do that. It's got to be a collaborated and integrated approach between all the stakeholders to ensure that you get all your data from wherever you're sending it to wherever you want to send it, to be able to get agreement on, yes, this is how we're going to do, and have clearly defined business processes in place, and then to use the system to drive your business process. One thing I did want to touch on was just some of the success that we've had in the past. I'm just waiting for the next slide, onboarding with HROnboard. That's a blank page. Let's just see what the next... There we go. So maybe there's the next one. Okay, cool. Yeah. So before we get into the actual process of HROnboard, I just quickly wanted to run some numbers because we just didn't want to talk around just the process. So overall, what we've done is we've used HROnboard probably for the last 2 to 3 months. Yeah. So contract updates is when you do a renewal of a contract, so existing employees getting an updated contract. We've done over 1,000 for this year, and it was linked to our contracts that we've rolled out, where previously it's taken us at least 2 weeks with probably 8 to 10 dedicated people. We've had 2 days worth of effort this year, and we had 3 people sitting there doing the work. So that's a massive saving in terms of people's time and effort to roll out contracts. And also the great thing is we could track every single day in terms of where people were at with the application process or the acceptance process. From an onboarding perspective, we've put through 246 new employees through our system in the last 3 months. Yeah. So we'll probably be closer to the 300 mark at the end of this month. So we average at the moment probably about 80 to 100 people per month through the system, and we'll probably be putting another 800 through in the next 2 years. So we are using the systems to its full capacity, trying to break it, but thus far it's actually been very successful in terms of what it's been doing in terms for us to have to offer a great candidate experience as well. So when we then look at the onboarding process with HROnboard, the great thing I guess with HROnboard is that it sends a text to the new hire, notifying them that there's been an offer made to them. The new hire will then get an email as well, and they can go and click on the link. Once they've clicked on the link, it goes to a welcome page, and you can then put in a video, you can put in a photo or whatever you want to put in, that's what you can put in there, some text around that. It also has a link to your LinkedIn page on LinkedIn. So if you've got a company profile on LinkedIn, you can link that in. And the great thing is so the moment you click on the link to accept your offer, you can already start connecting to current employees that might be in your network. And then you go through the easy process of actually filling in the forms. And once you've filled in your forms, we then use that data to populate SAP with. But the other thing from a candidate experience is all they have to do is go to one page, complete all the information, and then that gets converted into the relevant templates and forms that you require as a business. And that gets emailed through, or not, sorry, it doesn't get emailed through, but it gets saved into the HROnboard application, and payroll, whoever your people in the company to actually update your systems can then just log into HROnboard and retrieve the information from there. Just another success story we had the other day was we sent out an offer to a candidate, and 30 minutes later the candidate was in SAP. So accepted all the documentation and the letter of offers and the terms and conditions, completed the information, and we had quality data sitting in our ERP system 30 minutes later. So with full integration, that's the sort of success you can achieve.
Yeah, which is, 30 minutes is just unheard of in comparison to what we were getting before, when we were saying it would take at least a couple of days for a candidate to complete, scan, complete, send back it all to us. The fact that the system does it all right there and then and sends it all through to SAP is just such a good win for us. I suppose we're all pretty proud to have been a part of that project.
That's it. Let's just quickly see what's on the next slide. I actually think...
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Sorry,
maybe not. There you go. Done.
That's okay. No, thanks a lot. Thanks for that really good story from Roy Hill. And they, as they said, they certainly are using the system, putting through, they've been live, I think, as they said, 3 months, certainly using the system to its fullest potential. And the integration is probably a key part of how they're able to sort of get the processing through so many candidates so quickly. So one of the things with HROnboard, we wanted to build it so that it's fully integrated and integratable with other systems, because as the guys said at Roy Hill, it does sit between other systems. So we've got a couple of ways of getting data in and out. There's basic end user integration through CSV, which is fairly typical. We basically importing or exporting via CSV. Also with HROnboard, we can do connectors for enterprise customers, sort of out of the box integrations. And we've partnered with Presence of IT to do sort of standard SAP and Oracle connectors. Now, Roy Hill didn't use those. They went and built their own. And then we've got the APIs, which is what Roy Hill did, to go develop their own integration. So what we might do now is go for some questions and start off by asking the Roy Hill team, I guess if you went through the process again, I guess what would you do differently? What have you really learned?
I guess from a project perspective, the biggest thing that we probably could have done better was not to underestimate the time and effort required to implement a system in between other systems where you have a lot of integration. As Helg mentioned, the integration alone took us 3 months because we did end-to-end integration. Our philosophy at Roy is not to have standalone systems where you have to duplicate additional work to keep things up to date. And also, I would probably say from a project management perspective was that initially we didn't have a very detailed plan. That changed afterwards because we realized that if we were going to be implementing the solution and we wanted it to be successful, we had to go through rugged and very detailed UAT testing, and we had to schedule the additional resources to participate in that because it wasn't just HR or IT doing it. It was a collaborative approach and effort required by everybody involved.
And it wasn't just HR. If you think within HR, you've got recruitment, which is handling the recruitment side of things, and then you've got payroll, which is ultimately ending up with all this information. So everyone has to be happy, and everyone there's multiple stakeholders.
Yeah, no, very true. We've also got some questions coming in from the audience. First one was, from Cheryl, did the successful candidate have a new login and password when going to HROnboard, or could they use the one from SuccessFactors? Cheryl, they did have to use a new login, but that's emailed out to them and very simply set up as they first sort of log in. Adam was asking, what was the SAP technology used for the integration piece? Helg, maybe you want to give a quick summary just on that. I know you touched on some of it during it, but maybe a quick sum up.
Yeah, okay, so we used SAP PI or SAP PO, depending on which term you want to use, which is the SAP Enterprise Service Bus, which many SAP customers use. I don't think it was, it didn't really offer us a lot of advantages necessarily. That's just what we use here at Roy Hill for all our integration. Now, HROnboard and SuccessFactors are both in the cloud, so technically you could use a cloud integration solution, but we chose to just use our on-premise integration because that's what we've got, and it works pretty well.
Okay, thanks. We've got a question from Anonymous. I guess, and Christo, you might have this. Are you able to quantify the time saved per successful hire now with the new solution?
I would probably say from a payroll perspective, we at least save 30 minutes per hire. And then from a overall end-to-end process, we would probably shave off at least a couple of days on the, I guess, on the chasing up and recruiters sitting there and following up to say, have you accepted the offer yet, and all of that. Nick, maybe you want to touch on the recruitment piece.
Yeah, definitely. So the savings are, like as Christo was saying, payroll, but also the candidate being able to return paperwork to us quickly, which allows us to move people through the process quicker, get them onboarded quicker, effectively get them on turning up at Roy Hill sooner. But also our administrators in the recruitment team are saving time there as well. So at the moment, we still generate our contracts manually, but before we used to have to attach things to emails in line with the candidate's position. So now we don't have to do that. We just generate the contract, upload it. This process was actually going through the HROnboard process has really assisted us in I suppose Christo might be able to add some more details to this, but before we had HROnboard, we had 20 or so different contract templates.
Yeah, we had 25 different templates, and it was purely focused on the work sites that we had, and also then the type of employment, so fixed and part-time, full-time, contractor, etc.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, we had a huge amount of templates, but HROnboard and the project and the integration has been a catalyst for us to reduce the number of templates we've got in the contract space. So we've simplified our contracts as a byproduct of this process anyway, but we would be saving at least a couple of hours on each offer in the administrative team anyway. So, you know, overall,
yeah, I can give you some numbers in terms of our average time to onboard. Now, bear in mind this is just through HROnboard, where previously it would have taken us at least, our turnaround time would have been a week, end-to-end process to get the contracts out and get it back. Yeah. On average at the moment, it's taking us 104 hours, so that's just over 4 days.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's some good figures. There's a couple of questions that are sort of related. I guess one of the things, an anonymous question was choosing HROnboard and all the integration interfaces required to support it worth not going with the SuccessFactors onboarding module?
Yep, so I can answer that, and the question is yes. The reason being is that because we dealt with Navigo and we could go to the actual developer themselves to query why some things are happening in the system, we were able to achieve and I guess not tweak the process, but we were able to get what we wanted versus the SuccessFactors, which is, and don't get me wrong, it's a great application. But for us, the onboarding solution was a lot, from a financial perspective, was a lot cheaper to implement in terms of the actual application. And also we were able to use, the existing functionality in Navigo or the HROnboard solution as well, where with SuccessFactors onboarding, they have got all the tax file decks for Australia, but from a letter or contract generator perspective, that functionality isn't quite there yet.
So the other thing I'd like to say to that is that we might have been able to save the integration to HROnboard, but the integration into SAP, I think we would have had to build anyway, because our experience has been that while SuccessFactors is now an SAP product, there really isn't any native integration between those two, and so you still need to do all that work to get the data in.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Christo was saying, the functionality just probably wasn't at the same level in the SF product compared to the HROnboard and localized. It's a lot better localized for Australia for us at the time anyway.
Okay. Another question from Anonymous. How much additional onboarding automation was included by IT access, PPE ordering, etc.?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
How much additional onboarding automation was included? Setting up IT access, issuing assets, or PPE ordering?
So we did include our PPE form because HROnboard can actually customize the application from a candidate's perspective, and then they can complete all that one page I was talking about. They can complete all the information from there, and then the output would be our normal PPE form. And so we were able to automate that process from an account provisioning perspective. We've got our account provisioning happening more from an SAP perspective. So once the candidate was generated or the information was generated in SAP, our identity management system would then pick up that information and do the account provisioning. So we don't do it from HROnboard, we actually do it from SAP.
Okay, thanks. A few more quick questions that we'll go through. Someone was asking a question about earlier in the presentation about the candidate receiving a text to confirm their offer's been emailed to them. How do they actually accept and return the offer? That's all done through the application. So they do electronic acceptance in HROnboard, and that then the offer is accepted through there, and there's no need for them to return it, print it out, or sign it. So it's all done within the application itself. Then there was a question, can success factors be used with different payroll systems, i.e. CRIS 21? And the answer is generally yes.
Yeah, correct. Well, success factors is a talent management solution sitting in the cloud, so success factors can be used with any payroll system. Are you talking success factors or HROnboard?
Success factors was the question.
Yep, correct. No, the answer is yes. So success factors can integrate with other payroll systems. Even though it's a SAP product, SAP product, you don't necessarily have to integrate with another SAP on-premise.
Yep. Then Russell asked a question, can you begin advertising and applicant tracking before any requisition authorization process? I think that's probably a success factor, how you're managing in success factors.
Yeah, so the way that Roy Hill operates is that you need an approved active requisition in order to advertise a position. So yeah, that generally we would approve a requisition first, then advertise it through the back end into the different job boards we use.
Okay, and one last question. And I think you may have covered it, so you may want. Maybe this be a sum up here from the Roy Hill team. What were the issues with SuccessFactors onboarding that prompted you to look at HROnboard?
I wouldn't necessarily say that there were issues with the system. It was more in terms of where we were at as a company and the functionality that we were chasing. The HROnboard module provided the exact functionality that we were chasing or looking for, where the biggest piece for us was generating contracts on an annual basis if we need to, which was probably our biggest driver for getting a solution that would be able to enable us to generate a contract online and then to track it through that, where I believe the onboarding module in SuccessFactors is more dedicated to the actual onboarding of employees. So we had two components, two gaps that we had to fill. The biggest gap for us was not the new hires, it was the existing employees where we had to update contracts. So that would probably have been our biggest drive in terms of the solution that we chose.
Yep. And just for sort of to cover that off a bit more, so HROnboard has really 3 use cases. So it is the onboarding of brand new employees that you're hiring into the organisation. There's also an offboarding component when people are leaving, and then the piece there that Roy Hill were looking at is what we call contract updates, and that's reissuing contracts to existing employees. And that's probably one, that reissuing of contracts is probably one that gets a lot of use because it is a very manual process in many organisations. One last question. Have you been able to calculate a payback on investment? And if so, if you're able to share it?
We are in the process of doing the calculation, and the reason being is we've just gone through the contract updates. The amount that we've invested, if we just take the new hires that we put through the system, so where payroll would have entered it manually previously and where they're now doing it, where it's now being automated. So we've saved 73 hours in terms of one person doing it manually over the last 3 months. So that's already a saving if you calculate what the average wage would be. That's 3 days worth of work. So that would, if you add it up over the full year, that would be more, the saving would be much bigger than the actual investment itself.
Yep.
And that doesn't even take into account the contract updates, where with the 8 days that we've saved with 8 people sitting in a room, it's 64 days of effort that we've saved, which would be over and above the investment amount. So we've already made our money back.
But on top of that, you kind of have a more non-tangible benefit in terms of the candidate experience is so much better. So from a marketing point of view for your company, you now have a much better onboarding experience for the new starters, which creates a much better impression when they join.
Okay, thank you. Look, we've gone through all the questions and we've used up our allocated time. I'd like to thank the team from Roy Hill for their support during the project and for spending their time sort of telling everybody about their journey and what they've received. A recording of the webinar will be made available, and so we'll send some information out once that's available. But thank you all very much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.